He checked his watch again as he stepped into the small cafe tucked between two tall buildings in the busy part of the city. The kind of cafe where the smell of coffee and fresh pastries hit you the moment you opened the door. He hated these situations. Blind dates. He had agreed to this one reluctantly, calling it his final experiment in social torture, as he jokingly told his friends. The truth was, after years of work and endless board meetings, he had lost patience with small talk, awkward silences, and people pretending to be someone they were not. He told himself he would stay 5 minutes, just enough to be polite, and then excuse himself. 5 minutes. That was it. He found a corner table near the window. From there, he could observe the cafe without feeling trapped. He smoothed his jacket, straightened his tie, and practiced his neutral, polite smile in the reflection of the glass. He wasn't nervous. He told himself he wasn't. But the truth was that he hadn't had a first date in years, and the idea of sitting opposite a stranger, someone who had probably been hyped up as perfect by a friend, made him uneasy. Across the city, she was preparing in her small apartment, humming to herself as she brushed her hair. She wasn't nervous either, though she tried to convince herself she was. She had been on blind dates before, a few fun ones, a few disastrous ones. Some ended before dessert. Some ended in awkward silence that lasted longer than the dinner itself. But she liked to think of herself as someone who enjoyed life and didn't take things too seriously. So she laughed at her own reflection, tugging her dress into place. "Let's make this interesting," she whispered, not to anyone, just to herself. When she arrived, he noticed her immediately. Not because she was stunning, though she was, but because she walked in with a confidence that seemed natural, not forced. She smiled at the barista, then scanned the cafe as if she were looking for a friend. When her eyes landed on him, she smiled again, this time a bit more intentionally. He stood, nodded slightly, and gestured to the seat across from him. She slid in gracefully, her bag dropping to the floor with a soft thud. The first few seconds were awkward, of course. They exchanged polite greetings, the usual, "How are you?" and "Thank you for meeting me." He noticed the warmth in her voice. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't trying too hard. He ordered a coffee black.
She chose a latte with a hint of cinnamon.
While the barista prepared their drinks, the silence stretched. He felt the familiar urge to check his watch, to count the seconds until his 5-minute limit. But something about the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear made him hesitate. He resisted the urge to leave. Finally, the conversation started. She asked about his work, not in the nosy, intrusive way some people did, but in a curious, gentle tone that invited an honest answer. He gave her a brief overview of his company, careful not to bore her with details, and to his surprise, she actually listened. Not just listened, but asked questions, smiled at the right moments, laughed lightly when he made a dry joke. And then it happened. Something small, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. She laughed at a comment he made that was meant to be humorous but probably sounded stiff. It wasn't the fake, polite laugh people usually gave. It was full, warm, and unexpected. He felt a shift inside him, subtle but real. For a moment, he forgot the 5-minute rule. He forgot that he had planned to leave. He forgot about schedules, meetings, and emails piling up in his office. She had that kind of laughter that made the room feel smaller, in a good way. Like it pulled you in, made everything around you fade. He found himself smiling without thinking, relaxing in a way he hadn't for years. His shoulders loosened. His posture straightened, not out of formality, but because he felt lighter. As they spoke, he noticed how naturally she moved in conversation. Her hands emphasized her words, but never in a distracting way. Her eyes sparkled when she smiled, and there was a sincerity in the way she listened. He realized he wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just being himself, and for the first time in a long time, it felt effortless. They talked about their families in brief, careful ways, nothing too personal, just enough to share pieces of their lives. She told a funny story about her childhood, how she had once accidentally locked herself in a small closet during a family gathering. He laughed more than he expected, and the sound of his own laughter surprised him. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he truly laughed with someone like this. The coffee arrived, but neither of them reached for it immediately. The conversation flowed too naturally. He found himself leaning in slightly, not consciously, but because he wanted to hear her better, to catch every detail. She noticed, and for a moment she smiled, that warm, knowing smile that made him feel seen. not just observed. He glanced at his watch, almost out of habit. But this time he didn't want to leave. 5 minutes had long passed, yet he felt a strange reluctance to stand up. He caught himself thinking maybe he could stay a bit longer. Just a little, and then maybe longer than that. She asked him about hobbies, about what he did when he wasn't working. He gave her a small list, expecting her to nod politely, but instead, she seemed genuinely intrigued. "You like that?" she asked, her tone light but curious. He explained, and she listened, asking questions that revealed a sharp mind and a playful spirit. For the first time, he realized something important. He had spent so long focusing on efficiency, on productivity, on controlling every part of his life that he had forgotten how it felt to enjoy something unexpected, something unscheduled, something entirely unplanned. He realized that maybe this was exactly what he needed, though he hadn't known it before this moment. She laughed again, a small infectious laugh at something he said almost carelessly, something he would have normally brushed off as trivial. But her laughter transformed it into something memorable. He noticed it wasn't just a laugh. It was a bridge. It was a connection that had formed in the briefest of time, but felt as if it had been years in the making. He caught himself thinking about the little things, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the way she tilted her head when listening intently, the way she gestured as she spoke. These details, small and fleeting, had a weight he couldn't explain. And with that realization, the 5-minute rule, his carefully constructed exit plan, suddenly felt absurd. Somewhere deep inside he felt a flicker of excitement, the kind that usually only came with big life changes, moments that shifted the ordinary into something extraordinary. And right in that cafe, over a simple cup of coffee, he began to understand that this blind date might be anything but ordinary. The conversation shifted naturally, from small talk to slightly more personal topics. She asked about dreams, about ambitions. He spoke carefully at first, the CEO in him wanting to sound measured, in control. But she didn't push. She simply listened, nodding, smiling, letting him speak freely, slowly, almost imperceptibly. He began to let down the walls he had built around himself for years. He told her about some of the pressures he faced, the late nights at work, the decisions that kept him awake, the responsibility that often felt heavier than he could bear. She listened without judgment. Instead, she laughed softly at his humorous moments, and her laughter seemed to lighten the weight of his words. He realized how rare this was, someone who could hear him and make the heaviness of life feel a little easier. The minutes kept passing. 10, 15, 20. He had completely lost track. The thought of leaving, of excusing himself politely, had disappeared. In its place was curiosity, genuine curiosity about this woman who, with nothing more than her laughter and presence, had made a lasting impression on him in less than half an hour. He caught her watching him at one point, and he felt a little self-conscious, but in a pleasant way. She wasn't judging, wasn't analyzing, she was simply observing, genuinely interested. He realized how rare that was, and with that realization, a smile spread across his face, unforced, real. When she noticed his smile, she laughed again, a soft, melodic laugh that seemed to echo in the quiet corners of the cafe. He laughed with her, a full, unrestrained laugh that startled even him. It had been so long since he had felt such simple joy. He realized in that moment that the 5 minutes he had planned to spend here were long gone. And he didn't care. As they continued talking, the conversation became easier, flowing naturally as if they had known each other far longer than a single morning. He noticed himself leaning in when she spoke, hanging on her words, genuinely enjoying her company. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a little spark of hope that maybe life had a few surprises left for him. When they finally sipped their coffee, long forgotten, he realized the time had flown. He glanced at his watch and the numbers startled him. Over an hour had passed, more than enough time for someone like him to follow through with a polite exit, to leave quietly and return to his orderly life. But he didn't move. He didn't even think about leaving. He only felt that strange pull, that sense that staying here, continuing this conversation, was exactly where he needed to be. She laughed at something he said, again that warm, melodic sound, and he realized that he hadn't planned for any of this. He hadn't expected to stay longer than 5 minutes, but now leaving felt impossible. He was intrigued, captivated, and for reasons he couldn't yet fully understand. He wanted more. And in that simple cafe, with the smell of coffee and pastries around them, surrounded by strangers who were lost in their own worlds, he made a silent decision. He would stay. He would stay not because he had to, not because of politeness, but because her laughter, her warmth, her presence had made him forget the world outside. And for the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, something beautiful could begin here. After the initial laughter, the conversation between them grew more relaxed, more real. He realized he hadn't felt this at ease with anyone in years. Usually, blind dates felt like interviews, like he had to impress or measure every word carefully. But with her, it was effortless. He didn't have to perform. He didn't have to be the polished, controlled man he always was in the office. Here, he could just be. She asked him about things most people never thought to ask. Not the standard, "What do you do?" or "Where are you from?" but questions that made him think, that made him pause. "What do you do when no one is watching?" she asked with a playful smile. He hesitated, caught off guard. He was used to talking about achievements, numbers, deals, but this was different. I guess I read," he said finally, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Or sometimes I just walk. No destination, just walk." She nodded, her eyes bright, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "That sounds peaceful," she said softly. "I love walking, too. It clears my mind, lets me think without pressure." She paused, her gaze drifting out the window for a moment. "Do you ever feel like life moves too fast and you miss the quiet parts?" He was surprised by the question, by the depth hidden in such simple words. Most people never noticed the quiet parts. They were too busy with schedules, deadlines, appearances. But she noticed, and he felt seen. There was something rare in that, something he hadn't realized he had been longing for. He found himself telling her small stories he never shared with anyone. How he used to sneak out of the office late at night just to watch the city lights, the calm after hours when the world seemed slower. How he once got lost on a hike alone and felt a strange sense of freedom. Every word seemed lighter than he expected. He noticed that she listened without judgment, without interrupting, without assuming. Her attention made him feel important in a way he wasn't used to outside of work. She laughed again at one of his stories, that easy, warm laugh that seemed to echo in the little cafe. And each time he felt a little more relaxed, a little more alive. There was a strange magic in that laughter, in the way it came naturally, unforced, like it belonged in the world as much as air or sunlight. "Do you ever worry about what people think of you?" she asked suddenly, leaning slightly forward, her tone curious but gentle. He paused. Normally he would have deflected, said something witty or vague. But he found himself answering honestly. "All the time," he admitted. "I spend so much of my life managing expectations, of clients, employees, friends, even family. Sometimes I forget what I actually want." She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than he had said. "I get that," she said. "It's like you carry everyone else's world on your shoulders and forget to carry your own." He smiled at the accuracy of her words. "Exactly," he said. "Exactly that." And then, almost without thinking, he added, "I've spent so long being careful, being perfect in public, that I forgot how it feels to just be real." She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Maybe that's what you needed today," she said softly, almost teasingly. "Someone to remind you how it feels to be real. To forget the rules even for a little while." He chuckled, shaking his head, but there was truth in what she said. He realized she was right. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't expected to enjoy a blind date, much less feel so. Understood. But here he was, sitting across from her, laughing, talking, sharing parts of himself he rarely showed anyone. They spoke about dreams next. Not the grand corporate-style ambitions he was used to listing in interviews, but simple dreams, things that mattered in quiet moments. She told him about her wish to travel, to see mountains and oceans, to feel the world in ways books and movies couldn't capture. She talked about small joys, like finding the perfect pastry on a lazy morning or hearing music that made her heart lift. He listened, fascinated. "I forget," he said softly, almost to himself, "how beautiful those small moments can be." She tilted her head, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you dream about when no one's watching?" He hesitated for a moment, then admitted, "I've always wanted to write. Not for anyone else, just for myself. Stories, thoughts, things I notice in the world, but life gets in the way and it feels selfish sometimes to spend time on something that doesn't have a purpose." She smiled encouragingly. "It's not selfish. It's you, and you deserve a life that includes the things that make you happy. Her words struck him unexpectedly, so simple yet so true. He had spent decades calculating, planning, striving, but no one had ever told him it was okay to just be happy, to chase joy without justification. And somehow here she was, a stranger, saying the exact thing he needed to hear. They laughed again, a comfortable, shared laughter that didn't feel forced. He noticed how easy it was to talk with her, how natural it felt to open up, and he realized with a quiet surprise that he didn't want the conversation to end. Not now, not ever. As the conversation flowed, he found himself noticing little details about her. The way she bit her lips slightly when thinking, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she loved, the subtle tilt of her head when listening. These small things felt intimate, personal, and he caught himself studying them without even realizing it. She noticed him looking and laughed lightly. "Do I have something on my face?" she teased, wiping at her cheek as if expecting a smudge. "No," he said quickly, a little embarrassed. I was just noticing how alive you are." Her laughter filled the cafe again, and he realized it was impossible not to smile with her. That laughter was a bridge between them, something neither could ignore, something that made the world feel softer, warmer, and lighter. At some point, the topic shifted to work, but it didn't feel like the usual awkward conversation about jobs. She asked him what he enjoyed about his work, what challenged him, what made him proud. He told her stories of small victories, moments where a decision had helped someone or made a difference. She listened, genuinely interested, asking questions that went deeper than surface-level curiosity. For the first time in a long time, he felt the joy of sharing his life with someone who actually cared, and he noticed something else. She never treated him differently because of his status or achievements. She saw him as a person, not as a CEO or a title. That alone made him feel lighter, freer, and strangely safe. They talked about books, about movies, about music. Each topic revealed something new about the other, and each discovery made him want to know more. She had a way of seeing the world that was bright, thoughtful, and humorous all at once, and in her presence he realized he wanted to be more than just careful, more than just controlled. He wanted to feel, to laugh, to take risks. The conversation moved to favorite memories, and she told him a story about a childhood summer, running barefoot in the rain, feeling completely free. He laughed at the image, picturing it vividly. Then he shared a memory of a small victory in his youth, a quiet moment of pride that no one had ever really celebrated with him. She smiled, genuinely happy for him, and he felt a warmth in that simple acknowledgement that he hadn't known he missed. As time passed, he realized he hadn't looked at his watch in what felt like hours. The 5-minute plan he had brought with him seemed ridiculous now. He wasn't planning to leave anymore. He was planning to stay, to continue talking, to continue discovering this woman who had made an ordinary morning feel extraordinary. She asked about the future next, but not in a heavy, serious way. She spoke about hopes, about possibilities, about where she wanted to be in 5 or 10 years. He found himself thinking carefully about his answers, not because he was trying to impress, but because he wanted her to understand him, to see him honestly. He spoke about wanting balance, about wanting to reconnect with the small joys he had ignored for too long. She listened, nodding, her expression thoughtful and encouraging. And then she laughed again, lightly, softly, that same laughter that had drawn him in from the very beginning. And it hit him suddenly, like a quiet revelation. He hadn't intended to stay past 5 minutes. He hadn't planned on enjoying this, but now he couldn't imagine leaving. He wanted to keep talking. He wanted to keep laughing. He wanted to keep discovering her and maybe discovering himself along the way. He realized something else, too. She had a way of making him feel present, fully alive, in a way he hadn't felt in years. Every smile, every question, every laugh was like a thread weaving them closer together, a subtle connection forming that neither of them had expected, but both could feel. By the time the sun had moved higher in the sky, casting a warm light through the cafe window, he had forgotten all about appointments, deadlines, and the carefully scheduled life, waiting for him outside. Here, with her, everything else faded. He was not a CEO in a suit. He was just a man talking to a woman who had, in less than an hour, made him feel more alive than he had in years. When she glanced at the window, noticing the sunlight, she smiled. "I can't believe how fast the morning went," she said. He laughed, a soft, warm sound that matched hers. "Me neither," he admitted. It went by too fast." She tilted her head, studying him. "I'm glad you stayed," she said quietly. And in that moment he felt something he hadn't expected, a gentle warmth in his chest, a quiet certainty that maybe this was the beginning of something far more important than a 5-minute polite encounter. The morning sunlight faded into a soft afternoon glow as they left the cafe, walking side by side along the quiet streets. He had suggested a nearby park, and she had agreed with an easy smile, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The city felt different now, less harsh, less hurried, as if the world had slowed down just for them. They strolled along the path, the occasional laughter spilling into the air when one of them shared a memory or a small joke. He noticed that he was no longer concerned with appearances, no longer rehearsing what he should say or how he should act. She had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, and he found himself leaning into it, into her, without even realizing it. "Do you come here often?" she asked casually, though he knew she was not looking for a simple answer. "Not really," he said, glancing at the pond ahead. "I usually go for more structured walks. Parks like this with people and ducks and unpredictability, I usually avoid. Too chaotic for my taste." She laughed softly. "Chaotic can be fun," she said, stepping carefully around a patch of damp grass. "You never know what might happen. You might see something beautiful, something unexpected." He smiled, thinking of her laughter earlier, how it had pulled him out of his carefully constructed world. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe I need more chaos." She tilted her head, studying him, her eyes bright. "You seem very controlled," she said lightly. "Is that a choice or just life?" He hesitated. No one had ever asked him that so directly. "A bit of both, I guess," he said finally. "Life demands control sometimes, but maybe I've taken it too far." Her laugh, quiet and melodic, reminded him again why he had stayed. It was like a bridge to a part of himself he had almost forgotten existed. "Well," she said softly, "maybe today is about letting go a little." They found a bench near the water, the ducks paddling lazily, the wind making small ripples on the surface. He sat first, then gestured for her to join. She lowered herself, gracefully beside him, and for a moment they just watched the water, the silence stretching comfortably between them. Finally she spoke. "Tell me something no one else knows about you," she said, her tone curious but gentle. He blinked, surprised by the request. Most people never asked that, or if they did, it felt like a test, something he had to perform for. But she wasn't testing him. She genuinely wanted to know, and without thinking he began to speak. I've always felt like I lived two lives," he admitted. "One is the life everyone sees, successful, controlled, always on top of things. The other is just me. The me who gets lost in a book, who notices the little details most people miss, who sometimes just sits and watches the world without purpose." She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I think most people forget the second life," she said softly. "They get so caught up in the first they never let themselves breathe." He looked at her, and something in her eyes made him feel understood. Not judged, not evaluated, just understood. "Exactly," he said. "I've forgotten how to breathe for myself." She smiled gently. "Then maybe you need reminders. Little moments like this where you can just exist." He chuckled softly. "I didn't expect to find a reminder on a blind date," he said. Her laughter, bright and easy, filled the space between them. "I didn't expect to be one," she said, nudging him playfully with her elbow. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Maybe we both got lucky," he said quietly. The conversation moved naturally, from light topics to deeper thoughts. She asked about his childhood, and he told her stories of long summers, of small victories and embarrassing moments, of the times he had felt truly alive without worrying about appearances. She listened intently, sometimes laughing, sometimes nodding thoughtfully, always present. "I've never shared some of these stories with anyone," he admitted at one point. "I can tell," she said softly. "But I'm glad you're sharing them now. It makes me feel like I'm really seeing you." He felt a warmth spread through him. Seeing him, that simple phrase held more weight than anything else anyone had said to him in years. And in that moment, he realized he wanted her to see all of him, not just the controlled, polished version. They talked about dreams next. She spoke about traveling to places she had only read about trying things she had always been curious about but never had the courage to pursue. He listened, fascinated, imagining her in those faraway places, experiencing life with the same openness and joy she showed here. "I've always wanted to write," he admitted finally, after a pause. "Not for work, not for recognition, just for myself. Stories, thoughts, small observations, but life keeps getting in the way." She smiled encouragingly. "Then start," she said simply. "Even a little is better than none. You'll find the world opens up when you create for yourself." Her words were gentle, but they struck him deeply. No one had ever said anything like that to him. For years, people had measured him by results, achievements, productivity. But she measured him by his soul, by his willingness to share, by his courage to be honest. They walked again, following a path lined with tall trees, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground. He noticed small details, the way her hair caught the light, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the rhythm of her steps. These small observations made him feel alive. He had never paid attention to these things before. Not really. They stopped at a small playground where children played, their laughter ringing out. She smiled, watching a little boy chase a stray ball. "It's funny," she said, "how kids laugh without thinking. They don't care what anyone thinks." He nodded, thinking of himself as a child, the carefree days long past. "I forgot what that felt like," he admitted. "To laugh without thinking, to just be." "Then maybe it's time to remember," she said softly, looking at him with that gentle, knowing smile. He felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. He realized that in her presence, he could let go, even just a little. And that realization made his chest feel lighter, as if a weight he hadn't noticed was finally lifting. They found a quiet corner by a small garden. The flowers were in bloom, their colors vibrant against the soft green of the leaves. She crouched down to smell a blossom, and he found himself watching, captivated by the simple joy she found in small things. "You notice everything," she said, straightening and looking at him. "Even the little things that most people overlook." "I've learned to notice," he said quietly, "but I've forgotten why." "Maybe you just needed the right person to remind you," she said, her eyes soft. "Someone who makes you see the world again." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her, feeling a mix of admiration and something deeper, something he hadn't named yet. He realized that he had been guarding his heart for so long, convinced that it was safer to stay closed, to remain controlled. But here she was, laughing, noticing, sharing, and he felt open, vulnerable even, but in a way that felt safe. They walked back toward the street, the sun now casting long shadows. He noticed how naturally they moved together, how easy it was to fall into step, to share space without effort. He realized that the day had passed almost unnoticed, that hours had slipped by in what felt like minutes. She glanced at him, a soft smile on her lips. "I'm glad we came here," she said. He smiled back, a quiet, genuine smile. "Me too," he said. "More than I expected." They stopped at a small bridge overlooking a stream. The water sparkled in the afternoon light, and he felt a strange sense of peace. "I don't want this day to end," he admitted quietly. "Maybe it doesn't have to," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. He laughed softly, a little embarrassed by the sincerity in his own words. "It's strange," he said. "I came here planning to leave in 5 minutes. I didn't expect any of this." "Life has a funny way of surprising us," she said, smiling. "Sometimes the things we plan least are the things we need most." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt a quiet certainty forming inside him. She had a way of seeing the world, and him, that he hadn't experienced in years. And in that moment he realized that maybe this connection, this laughter, this understanding was exactly what he had been missing. As the sun began to dip lower, casting a warm glow over the city, he felt a shift inside himself. The controlled, careful man who had planned to leave in 5 minutes was gone, replaced by someone who wanted to stay, who wanted to explore, who wanted to feel. And all of it was because of her laughter, her warmth, and the way she made the world feel lighter. They walked back slowly, side by side, the city buzzing around them but feeling distant. And in the quiet moments between their words, in the shared smiles and gentle glances, he realized something important. He had never planned for this, never expected it. And yet here he was, open, curious, and undeniably drawn to her. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the thrill of something real, something alive, something that could change everything. The next morning he woke up earlier than usual. Normally his mornings were a rush of emails, calls, and schedules, but today was different. He didn't reach for his phone immediately. Instead, he thought about her. The way she had laughed, the way she had listened, the way she had made him feel like he could just be himself. A small smile tugged at his lips, and he realized he hadn't felt this light in years. She too felt a flutter of excitement. She kept replaying moments from their walk and conversation, remembering how easily he had opened up, how genuine his smiles had been. There was something about him that made her heart beat a little faster, something that drew her in even though they had known each other for such a short time. They met again the next evening, deciding on a quiet restaurant, one of those small places where the music is soft and the lights are warm. At first their conversation was easy, flowing like it had the day before. He found himself laughing freely again, not worrying about schedules or impressions. She had a way of making even ordinary moments feel extraordinary. But as the night wore on, tension crept in, subtle at first, like a shadow on the edge of the warmth. He had a sudden work emergency, a client situation that required him to leave immediately. He hesitated, torn between responsibility and the desire to stay. He had always prioritized work over everything else, and part of him instinctively started calculating what he needed to do, how he could leave without causing problems. She noticed the change in his demeanor, the brief flicker of worry crossing his face. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but concerned. He sighed, running a hand over his forehead. "It's just work," he said. "Something urgent came up. I might have to step out for a bit." Her eyes softened, but she didn't push. She simply nodded, understanding without judgment. "I get it," she said quietly. "But will you come back?" He looked at her, and for a moment he thought about how easy it would be to just leave, to slip away and deal with the problem alone. But then he thought about her laughter, her warmth, the way she had made him feel alive yesterday and today, and he realized he didn't want to leave. "Not yet, not like this. I'll handle it quickly," he said finally, "and then I'll be back. I want to finish our evening." She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and patience in her expression. "I'll wait," she said simply. He called his office, giving quick instructions, delegating tasks, and making sure the emergency would be under control. But even as he spoke, he couldn't stop thinking about her, about how much he didn't want to step away from her presence. There was a pull he couldn't explain, a desire to stay connected, to continue discovering her. When he returned, she was still seated at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass absent-mindedly. She looked up as he approached, and her smile made the tension fade from his chest. "Took you long enough," she teased lightly, though her tone held warmth rather than annoyance. He chuckled, feeling the relief wash over him. "Had to make sure nothing blew up," he said. "But I'm back. And I'm here." Their conversation picked up again, but the earlier disruption left a subtle shadow. He felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the urge to overthink, to measure his words, to keep everything under control. She noticed the shift, the way he occasionally glanced at his watch or tensed when the waiter approached. "You don't have to be perfect," she said softly, reaching out to touch his hand lightly. "Not here. Not with me." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. He realized how much he had been holding back, how much of himself he had hidden behind discipline and control. And in her presence, for the first time, he felt safe enough to let some of it go. He began to share more, opening up about fears he rarely voiced. He spoke of the pressure of his work, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied his success, and the moments when he doubted himself despite all his achievements. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his face, her presence steady and comforting. "I've always thought I had to handle everything alone," he admitted quietly. "But being here with you, it feels different. Less heavy." She smiled softly, squeezing his hand gently. "You don't have to be alone," she said. "Not when there's someone willing to listen, willing to understand." He felt a wave of gratitude, a mix of relief and affection he hadn't expected to feel. He realized that her presence was changing him, making him question old habits, old rules. He wanted to be more open, more present, more willing to take risks in life and in relationships. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned lighter again, filled with jokes and playful teasing, laughter spilling naturally between them. But underlying it was a growing intimacy, a sense of connection that neither could ignore. He noticed how her eyes sparkled when she laughed, how her expression shifted subtly with every word, and he felt drawn to her in a way that went beyond attraction. They walked out of the restaurant, the city lights reflecting in the wet pavement from a light evening rain. He noticed the way she moved, confident yet relaxed, and he felt a protective instinct he hadn't realized he had. She sensed his gaze and looked up at him, smiling. And he realized that the desire to stay close wasn't just about attraction. It was about care, about connection, about wanting to be present in her life. But then, as they reached a quiet corner of the street, his phone buzzed again. Another work issue, more urgent this time. He hesitated, torn between responsibility and the desire to remain in this rare, fragile space of connection. He felt the familiar pull of duty, the old habits of prioritizing work above all else, and he realized how difficult it was to break free from them. She noticed the conflict in his expression. "You're thinking about leaving again, aren't you?" she asked gently, her tone calm but firm. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I have to deal with it. I can't ignore it." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "I understand," she said. "But remember, you don't have to carry it all alone. You can choose where to put your energy, and sometimes that means choosing to stay where you want to be." Her words struck him deeply. She wasn't judging him for his responsibilities. She was reminding him of choice, of agency, of the power to decide what mattered most in any given moment. And he realized that staying here with her was a choice worth making. "I don't want to leave," he admitted softly. "I really don't." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "Then don't," she said simply. He felt a sense of relief, a release of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. For the first time, he made a conscious decision, not dictated by duty, not by habit, but by desire, by the pull of connection and the realization that some moments are worth holding on to. They continued walking, their hands brushing occasionally, the touch small but meaningful. He found himself noticing details he had missed before. The sound of her laughter carried in the evening air, the way she leaned slightly when she spoke, the warmth she radiated without trying. And with each observation, he felt a deeper pull toward her, a desire to remain close, to share more, to be more. As they reached a small park, he suggested they sit for a moment on a bench under the trees. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and earth, and he felt a quiet calm settle over him. They sat side by side, neither speaking immediately, simply enjoying the shared space, the rare silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever regret the choices you've made?" she asked softly. He considered the question, thinking about years spent chasing success, about decisions that had cost him personal connections and moments of joy. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I think I've learned from them, and maybe they led me here." Her eyes softened and she reached out to touch his hand again. "I'm glad they did," she said simply. "I'm glad you're here now." Her words, simple and genuine, resonated deeply. He realized that the connection they were forming was not just fleeting or superficial. It was real, built on laughter, understanding, and the willingness to be seen without pretense. And he felt a surge of gratitude and hope, mixed with something more, something he hadn't named yet, but recognized as the beginnings of trust and affection. They stayed in the park until the streetlights flickered on, casting soft pools of light around them. He felt a quiet sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The work issues that had tugged at him earlier felt distant, manageable. She had reminded him that he could choose where to focus, that connection and presence could be as important as duty and responsibility. As they walked back toward the street, he felt a quiet thrill of anticipation for what might come next, for the moments they would continue to share, for the possibility of something lasting and meaningful. And he realized with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in a long time, that this connection, born of laughter, understanding, and shared moments, was worth holding on to, worth nurturing, worth exploring fully. The weeks that followed felt like a gentle unfolding, a quiet discovery of what it meant to truly connect with someone. He had never allowed himself to experience life this way. Slowing down, noticing the small joys, laughing freely, sharing thoughts without calculation, and yet, here he was, drawn into a world that had been waiting quietly for him all along. They spent time together in simple ways, the kind of moments that didn't need grandeur or planning. Long walks through the city streets where she pointed out small details he would have overlooked. A flower growing between cracks in the pavement, a child chasing a bird across the square, a stranger's genuine smile in the morning light. Each moment made him feel more alive, more awake to the beauty of the ordinary. He began to notice changes in himself he hadn't expected. The rigid structure of his days softened. Meetings that had once been his entire focus became part of a larger life, not the totality of it. He smiled more easily, laughed without restraint, and discovered that the weight he had carried for years, the pressure, the control, the constant calculation, was lighter now. And she was at the center of it all, not as someone who demanded change, but as someone who inspired it. She, too, found herself opening in ways she hadn't before. His steady presence, the way he listened with care, made her feel seen and valued. She shared stories she had long tucked away, dreams she had hesitated to voice, fears she hadn't dared to admit, and he welcomed each piece of her with patience and warmth, making her realize that trust wasn't just given, it was nurtured. Carefully, gently, like a fragile bloom. One evening, they found themselves at a quiet cafe they had stumbled upon on a weekend walk. The light was soft, spilling across the tables, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and pastries. They sat across from each other, drinks in hand, but conversation wasn't the priority this time. It was the quiet comfort of presence, the understanding that neither needed to fill the silence with words. He watched her laugh at something she remembered from earlier in the week, a small story she told about her family, and he realized how much he cherished these little glimpses of her life. She noticed his gaze and smiled, and he felt a warmth spread through him that went beyond simple fondness. "I never thought a blind date could lead to this," he said softly, almost to himself. She laughed, a gentle, melodic sound that he had come to associate with happiness itself. "I didn't either," she admitted, "but I'm glad it did." They shared a quiet laugh, and in that moment, it wasn't about titles, schedules, or the outside world. It was just the two of them, existing together in a shared space of trust and affection, and in that simple, unspoken understanding they found something rare and precious, the beginning of forever. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew deeper. He began to introduce her to the small rituals of his life that he had once thought private or unimportant. Early morning walks before the city awoke, quiet afternoons with a book in a sunlit corner of his apartment, the satisfaction of finishing small tasks he had ignored for months. She embraced each new detail with curiosity and joy, asking questions, noticing the little things, and laughing freely. She shared her world too, her favorite cafes, hidden spots in the city that few people knew, quiet corners of parks, streets lined with bookstores she adored. He began to look at the city differently, seeing it through her eyes, noticing the vibrancy, the subtle beauty, the unexpected moments that made life feel alive. It wasn't always perfect. There were disagreements, of course, moments when misunderstandings surfaced or old habits reemerged, But they handled them with a rare combination of honesty and patience, speaking openly about feelings without blame, listening without judgment, and seeking understanding rather than victory. Each challenge became an opportunity to strengthen the bond, to prove to themselves and each other that connection wasn't just about laughter and joy, but also about trust, forgiveness, and care. He remembered the first day, the 5-minute rule, and he laughed quietly to himself. It seemed almost absurd now that he had walked into that cafe ready to leave after only minutes, convinced that the encounter would be brief and forgettable. And yet that very brief encounter had transformed everything. 1 hour had turned into days, weeks, and months of connection, laughter, and shared moments. One small choice to stay had changed the trajectory of his life entirely. She noticed his smile and tilted her head, curious. "What are you thinking?" "Just remembering," he said. "How strange it is that I almost left after 5 minutes." Her laughter, soft and warm, filled the space between them. "And yet here we are," she said, her eyes bright with affection. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "Here we are." Time passed, but their connection only grew stronger. They explored the city, tried new foods, visited art galleries, attended small concerts, and spent quiet evenings simply talking. He found himself sharing things he had never shared with anyone: fears, regrets, hopes, and the small, simple dreams he had tucked away. She listened with care, her presence steady, her laughter a constant reminder that joy could be found even in small moments. One evening, he surprised her with a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from a nearby park. She laughed softly, delighted, and he felt a warmth in her eyes that made his heart lift. "You really didn't have to," she said, smiling. "I wanted to," he said simply. "Just a small reminder that someone is thinking of you." She reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you did," she said. That simple gesture carried more meaning than words could express. It was a quiet affirmation of care, of attention, of connection, and he realized that love didn't always arrive with grand gestures or declarations. Sometimes it was in the quiet moments, the small acts of thoughtfulness, the shared laughter, and the understanding that someone saw you fully and chose to stay. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. He found himself more patient, more present, more willing to embrace the small joys he had once ignored. She encouraged him to explore new experiences, to take time for himself, and to see the world with curiosity rather than calculation. In turn, he offered stability, support, and a steady presence that made her feel safe and valued. Together, they discovered a balance neither had known they needed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, he took her hand and led her to a small park overlooking the city. The air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming flowers, and the city lights began to twinkle as darkness settled in. "I want to ask you something," he said, his voice quiet but steady. She looked at him, curiosity and anticipation in her eyes. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I know we met by chance, or maybe fate. I never expected a blind date to lead to something like this, but I can't imagine my life without you now. I don't want to imagine it. Will you be with me? Not just for a day, a week, or a month, but for everything that comes next?" Her eyes softened and she smiled, a gentle, radiant smile that made his chest feel full. "Yes," she said simply, her voice carrying warmth and certainty. "Yes, I will." He felt a wave of relief, joy, and quiet triumph wash over him. All the careful planning, the control, the hesitation, they all faded in the presence of that simple, life-changing affirmation. They embraced, a quiet, steady hug that carried the weight of promises, trust, and love. In the months and years that followed, their life together continued in much the same way, full of small moments of joy, laughter, and shared understanding. They faced challenges, of course, but each one became an opportunity to grow closer, to trust more deeply, to support one another with patience and care. He remembered the first day often, the absurdity of planning to leave after 5 minutes, and he laughed quietly to himself. How strange life was, he thought, that such a small decision could change everything. That 1 hour, one smile, one laugh, had transformed his life completely. And as they sat together in their favorite park one evening, watching the sunset over the city, he realized that forever didn't need grand declarations or elaborate plans. It was found in the quiet presence of someone who made life brighter, lighter and infinitely more meaningful. It was found in laughter, in shared stories, in understanding, in care. And he knew, with a certainty that had been missing for so many years, that he had found it with her.
One last blind date, he thought with a smile.
One that almost ended in 5 minutes but had lasted a lifetime. They sat together, hands entwined, hearts full, laughter and warmth surrounding them like a gentle embrace. And in that quiet, perfect moment, the world felt right, complete, and theirs, forever.